What's the point of haikus? As a Westerner who studied poetry as my major and lived in Japan for the better part of 2 decades, maybe I can offer some insight. The real trick to haiku is in how densely one can pack meaning into a very short turn of phrase. A lot of the work is done by the reader when seasonal imagery appears and elucidates the meaning of a haiku. Perhaps one should look at it this way. Beneath the layer of imagery is often a deeper cultural context from which a more nuanced meaning can emerge. But it's a kind of esoteric meaning that, to an extent, requires the reader to have a Japanese mind. For this reason, it's entirely understandable that haiku doesn't quite hit you the same way as other poetry. The closest analog I've ever seen in Western poetry is the designedly short poem often attributed to Hemingway. For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn, tells a story, right? We can almost feel the despair, the emptiness left where there was once the hope and excitement of a couple about to welcome their child into the world. We, the readers, do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to ascribing meaning to the poem. But the 6 simple words do conjure a fairly consistent image that many if not most readers recognize in context. Haiku is like that, but with different ways of conjuring meaning. Let's look at one of my favorites from Taniguchi Busan, which I'll translate. Mi ni shimu yanakatsuma no kushi wanya ni fumu. It pierces my body, the comb of my dead wife I step on in our bedroom. Here we have a story of loss. A cold realization of the emptiness left after one's life partner has died. Perhaps an admission of guilt for neglecting her while she was alive. Certainly the pain of solitude. It paints a picture in so few words. Yet we find ourselves able to read between the lines to find layers of meaning in spite of the poem's brevity. Haiku is an acquired taste, I think. But the point is to pack a story so tightly that the reader has the experience of that meaning unfurling itself before them, like a flower blooming before their eyes, or the ashes of a burnt photograph crumbling with their touch. Haiku can be great, but they don't always make sense. Refrigerator. Because they're elegant and minimalist like pretty much all Japanese art. From what I understand, the visual beauty of the characters is as much a part of the original Japanese form and impossible to recreate in Western alphabet where we just reduce it to a syllable pattern. Japanese syllables. Mora, technically not syllables at all, represented by one kanji, work very differently from English syllables. A lot is simply lost in translation, like the way a haiku looks when it's written down. There are of course other factors like the natural speaking rhythm that makes it a different experience plus cultural history. As a Japanese speaker myself, I'd say the best way to appreciate haiku would be to learn classical Japanese because that's what haiku is made for. Any translation into English or even modern Japanese, or worse yet, one of those English haikus, robs the art form of essence and reduces it to a series of restrictions. A simple comparison between Japanese and English would show that the former requires much less characters and syllables to convey an idea. It's not about point, it's about emotions, yes? Such as its meaning. You could ask the same question about every form of poetry. I took a deep liking to haikus as a kid. To me it helped me get to the point a bit. I would always over-describe and over-write. To me a good haiku may not have rhyme, but it should have a good rhythm. In my reading of articles just now, I like how they describe it here. In this way of thinking, the haiku is a lightning bolt. Fast, clear, and striking. It shows a whole panorama of thought in a single flash. I think the rules of making a haiku can be loosened too. Not everyone adheres to the 5-7-5, which surprised me at first but then made sense when I remembered that it is an American tradition we made up at some point. A personal rule I've made up for my haikus is to not repeat any words. Unlike the majority of haikus, that's what makes some bland emo. Here's an example haiku the article shows. Even in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo's cry, I long for Kyoto. But here is how I might write it instead. Even in Kyoto, heading the cuckoo's cry, I long to be home. Haikus feel accessible, like you can jump into and out of writing a poem in 60 seconds. I love thinking of them on the go and jotting it down if it sounds any good. Here is one I just made up about heavy snowfall late at night. The silence deafens. Flurried flakes falling forward. Quiet midnight dance. I tried to write a clever poetic response, but alas I've failed. Not a poetry person, though I respect the heck out of all the forms. Don't speak Japanese, and don't really know the deep history and details of haiku. That being said, I love haikus and find myself drawn to them as my preferred form of poetry. I believe the reason why is I've always seen poetry as a distilled form of long-form writing. It's about conveying emotion, story, descriptive, etc. in a concise form. Haiku's form forces extreme minimalism in presentation while at the same time requiring so much be packed into every syllable. This means focus is an absolute must. But at the same time extreme focus on nothing is not art, so the details of the haiku are encouraged to be about something, both literally and figuratively. In the end, the best haikus read just seem to convey nothing, but everything. At the same time, it feels very zen to me, which is probably also part of the intention and another reason why I find them so appealing. It's about the form, a Western ear cannot hear. The intricate style, you ludicrous ass. This is my favorite haiku. It's fine I'll pull out. My girlfriend oops it's not fine. Morning after pill. Robin Williams did a Martian haiku. Red sand between my toes. Summer vacation in outer space. So there's a 1,000-year tradition of poetry that actually inform the haiku in Japan. And the idea that they're considered elegant and profound actually comes from the word play, style, word use, and references that are intrinsic to Japanese poetry. Unless you study the Manushu, the Hyakuinshu, Kokinshu, and the later poetry anthologies from medieval Japan. Then look at the kanji usage in Japanese haiku and the renga they emerged out of. You're not going to be able to get them. Why? Because Japanese language can have one kanji stand in for a word, idea, symbol, and it can be multiple ideas and multiple words in the way that the Romanized languages simply cannot do. So there's richness there. There's also richness of when a haiku poet uses a word that is used in those older poetry anthologies, so they're basically dropping a reference that only those who are educated would know. Haiku now, because they've been taught in non-Japanese languages, are mainly associated with just syllable count. But to properly write a profound classical Japanese haiku, you have to actually open with stylized references to season, called kigo, and you'd have to train in what actually associated with what season. So say referencing persimmon is actually a reference to summer, etc. To recognize it, what became associated to what season emerged out of that 1,000-year poetic tradition. So it's basically another way to sort of mention older poems and recombine their ideas. They also use a kireiji cutting word to mark a linguistic turn. Again, there is no English language equivalent, so you're missing stuff if you're only looking at English language haiku. So the greatness of these things takes study to understand. It's about the way in which the poem is situated in a tradition. And the poet is playing, speaking to, arguing against, innovating within that tradition. That again, if you're not studying, you're not going to get. If you can get your hands on 100 poems from the Japanese, ed. by Kenneth Rexroth, it can give you an idea of how devastating short pieces like haiku can be. I don't like poetry all that much. It uses a lot of words to say little. I love haikus because they say so much in so little words. You paint a scene, describe something, then add a twist. Often it's about simply noticing something in life that would usually be ignored or taken for granted. The form is rigid, consciousness is chaotic, calming symmetry. Looking for logic. In art, where feelings are key. A fool's endeavor. Because it's different in Japan. It's 5 characters, not 5 syllables. A character is an entire word. Characters have so much more depth than the word they represent. Many characters have entire philosophical schools built around them. It's in that context that haikus really show themselves. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.